Good afternoon. Eitan Shalom at the Body Mind Wellness Center in San Diego. And sorry, I've misplaced the tripod, so this is going to be handheld. I'm here live from my kitchen, and I'd like to speak with you today about the role of the pungent flavor in Ayurveda, the role of the pungent flavor in stimulating and preserving Agni. Let's talk very briefly about Agni. Agni is fundamentally your digestive fire, your metabolic fire. It's also your mental fire. And we won't get into that because there's a whole mental aspect in Ayurveda that involves Agni as well. But today we're talking about the physical aspect of Agni, though they are interrelated. And we can see that really clearly with the recent science on the gut-brain connection, and also common sense. How you feel when you eat. And wasn't there that film about the guy that went on the junk food diet and then got depression, ended up with major depression? So Agni. Agni is your digestive fire, and the role of Agni is to break down the solid material that we eat into energy and micronutrients. So everything that we eat, the bulk of the food that we eat for energy and for strength, ergo what Chinese medicine calls rice and meat, but rice, grains, starchy things, as well as nutrient-dense protein things, as well as nutrient-dense fatty things. So examples would be nuts, which are high in protein and fat, all of the flesh foods, all of the dairy products, anything you can think of that's starchy. All of those foods are fundamentally intrinsically bland. They're fundamentally intrinsically on the heavy side. Many of them are naturally sweet or naturally oily. So again, starches, proteins, and fats are what we eat for energy and strength. They are what we eat for calories. They are calorie dense, fiber dense, and the effect that they have on the body is that they are fundamentally, first and foremost, nourishing. Second, because they're high in caloric content, fundamentally warming. Many of them are fundamentally moistening, and you see that where if you overeat carbohydrates, you can develop moist pathologies, such as obesity, first of all, but also things like yeast and candida and stuff like that. These foods are fundamentally relaxing and soothing, which is exactly why and how lab rats and humans get addicted to the sweet taste when it's available in excess. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors obviously probably only binged on sweet food in the summer when certain fruits were available. And so these sweet foods are also fundamentally soothing and relaxing, which is why you feel good after you eat and you feel relaxed. And when you overeat, you want to go to sleep. So that's, I've just described the sweet flavor actually in foods, and I've described the bulk of the food that we eat for energy and strength. So if you imagine that all of those things that we eat for energy and strength, many of them we cook, some of them we don't. But if you imagine your stomach as a pot, and that you put ingredients into, and now you have to cook it as a soup, into a soup in order to consume it, the cooking is done by your Agni. The cooking is done by your Agni. It's your natural digestive fire, which is a function of the fiery liquids in your gut, such as saliva, such as hydrochloric acid, such as pancreatic enzymes, such as the enzymes that are secreted into the small intestine, And bile is bitter, and that, I won't get into bitter today, but bitter also has a role in digestion. But so just keep that in your mind, that the digestive, that just as all of these nutrient rich foods are sweet, the flavors that we use to help digest that heavy food are the flavors salt, pungent, sour, and astringent. Sour would be like lemon or lime. Astringent's an interesting one. Pomegranate, there aren't that many astringent things, but there's an astringency in many spices. And then there's an astringency in certain dried fruits, such as amla fruit and pomegranate. Some foods are astringent like beans. Won't get into that right now. But just to know that astringency is one of the flavors that helps digestion. Sour, pungent, and salt. And that's why all humans all over the world, at a minimum, add salt to food in order to make it more palatable, and it stimulates your digestive fire. Salts have minerals in them as well. Today we're going to talk about the pungent flavor, because the pungent flavor of salt, pungent, sour, and astringent, it's the pungent flavor that most directly stimulates Agni. And so getting back to this, all of these fiery liquids, such as pancreatic enzymes and hydrochloric acid, and even saliva, it's interesting because why do I call them fiery liquids? Because they act like fire does in nature. What does fire do in nature? One of the things fire does, of course, it provides heat, it provides light. It provides heat and light as a byproduct of breaking down solid things into gases. Breaking down solid things into gases. You light a piece of paper and watch it burn, and the what's left is ash, and what's produced is light, heat, and gas. So fire has the quality in nature of breaking things down, and fiery liquids in our body have the same function of breaking down and metabolizing. Starting with the saliva, which breaks down carbohydrates in the mouth, hydrochloric acid, which does just what you would think it does in the stomach to convert our solid material into a soup. That's why when you vomit, it's depending on how digested it is, you can see remnants of the food you ate. The pathologist in the detective shows can tell what the person's last meal was, but it looks pretty disgusting. It doesn't look like what was on your plate because it's been liquefied by hydrochloric acid. And then even at the cellular level, there are metabolic functions going on involving enzymes, and enzymes are also sort of like fiery liquids in the body. And that's why all of this potential to metabolize well, that's a function of Agni, tends to be naturally strong in Pitta dosha dominant types, because Pitta types are naturally fiery. They can have naturally fiery minds, they can have naturally fiery intellects, they can have naturally fiery guts, for better and for worse. It can give them strong digestion. It can also give them stomach ulcers and all kinds of digestive tract problems, gut problems involving fire from mouth ulcers to hemorrhoids to burning holes in the intestines, such as diverticulosis, diverticulitis, stuff like that. So every knife cuts two ways. If there's one thing you learn in life, learn it early. Every knife cuts two ways. So the very quality of fire that we need to break down solid food into energy can be excessive in Pitta types, and it can be naturally weak in Vata types and Kapha types, because Vata is cold and Kapha is cold, naturally cold. Kapha is naturally cold because it's the manifestation in a human of water and earth, and water is naturally cooling. Vata, the manifestation of wind and space. Outer space is freezing cold, wind cools things off. So Vata and Kapha can have naturally weak guts, so they have to really have enough digestive spices and flavors to stimulate the digestion of that heavy food that I talked about, grains, starches, flesh foods, dairy products, nuts and seeds. And that's exactly why you see, as a clinician, you see people in the United States, or I bet that's the same thing in places like Germany and England, where you have diets that are overwhelmingly rich in heavy food, sweet food, without very much spice. I mean, the standard American diet that I grew up with, you'd have a piece of meat, you'd have some kind of potato, if you'd have some kind of frozen vegetable, usually peas or carrots, rarely large amounts of bitter green tasting things. And the only spice would be the salt and pepper on the table, or maybe if you're lucky, mustard or ketchup. I mean, there was my mother liked to cook, and so for example, she would put onion in the tuna salad sandwiches, so that was very tasty, as my Indian friend would say. But you get my point. And so throughout the American Midwest, you have this I call it the bland belt, where I remember going to a Christmas meal, and the most interesting dish was what's that dessert with marshmallows and I don't know, some kind of ambrosia, and then there was a potato salad with mayonnaise, no mustard in it, even just mayonnaise. And so I think that to be funny, I think the primary spice of the American Midwest is mayonnaise. Okay. Now, so we have this dichotomy between heavy stuff that needs to be broken down and what breaks it down, which is fire. And we can stimulate the fire, the digestive fire, the Agni, with spices and flavors. And today we're going to talk about pungent. We'll leave salt, bitter, sour, and astringent for another day. So the pungent flavor includes all spices, every spice you can think of. If it's a spice, it's a spice because it's pungent, which means that it's powerful. What does pungent mean? It's powerful in a small amount, and all spices stimulate Agni. The majority of spices range from warming to actually full-on hot, but there are some spices that are cooling. Talk about that in a minute. But it's summer. Everybody loves peppermint tea, and peppermint is cooling. It stimulates Agni, it preserves Agni, but it's cooling. It's very pungent. Is it as pungent as chili pepper? No. So spices, pungent flavor, powerful in small doses, contain spices. All the spices contain digestive enzymes in the spice itself. They also, because they contain essential oils, they stimulate your own digestive enzymes. The other flavor that does that well is bitter, but we'll talk about that another day. As I said, most spices are warming, some are cooling. Spices have an antimicrobial effect. It's possible that the reason why there's so much spicy food in hot climates is that they discovered that they could use it as a preservative. Just a theory. I remember reading a spiritual book in my 20s, and the teacher, Sri Ramakrishna of Bengal, was talking about using spices to preserve a goat curry for 5 days. And I thought, wow, 5 days in that heat. Yeah. And spices also, pungent flavor also stimulates blood flow and can have an anti-inflammatory effect. So, but that's sort of a little bit of semi-science. It is science. But the thing from the Ayurvedic standpoint, the thing to just think about with the pungent flavor is that it stimulates Agni, and Agni is what helps you digest. Agni is what digests the food that you eat. And Agni is akin to the fire on the stove that's underneath the pot that's boiling the water in which you've placed all of your vegetables and proteins and starches. Okay? Now, pungent, hot, cooling. It's very easy to understand the hot spices because when you eat them, they make you feel hot. Chilies the hottest spices are all the different kinds of chilies, or chile as they call it in Mexico, where Chile are from. Chile in Spanish, Indians call them chilies. So chilies are by far the hottest. I mean, no amount of black pepper comes close to some of the small amount of some of the really hot chilies. Black pepper is a hot spice. Ginger is a hot spice. Clove is a hot spice. And then you have warming spices, such as cinnamon, oregano. Thyme is more of a hot spice. All of those culinary herbs that we grow in the West, in the garden, from bay leaf to rosemary, they vary from warming to more warming. And then you have some spices. I want to talk about the spices that are cooling because they're more the exception. If I haven't mentioned it today, it's probably warming. Cumin is warming, but coriander is actually cooling. And coriander is very strongly antibacterial. It's one of the bases of Indian cooking. I mean, ratio-wise, we often in Indian cooking use more coriander than other spices. So coriander, which is very antibacterial, can actually lower fevers, which is why it's in Dr. Wickramasinghe's tea, which is on my website, which is a tea used in the winter for colds and flu. So coriander is cooling. Coriander leaf, cilantro in Mexico, is extremely cooling. Fennel is considered cooling in Ayurveda, but warming in Chinese medicine. Doesn't really matter. It's not a hot spice. I perceive it as cooling because I'm influenced by Indian culture. Cardamom is also a spice that's variously described as warming and cooling. It's certainly not hot. And I'm going to talk about cardamom in detail in my next talk. Peppermint. And what's interesting is spearmint is a warming herb, but peppermint, even though it has the word pepper in it, is cooling. So another aspect of the spices, besides whether they're cooling or warming, are cooling, warming, or hot. I left something out. Garlic is quite warming. Is that spices, in addition to being pungent, so now I'm talking about spices and the pungent flavor. So the pungent clavor exists in predominantly in spices, but in some other foods. But within the world of spices, let's take an individual spice like coriander. Coriander is pungent because it's a spice, but it's also sweet.